good to meet you today. And my name is Yimon A, and I'm a professor at Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne, Switzerland, or EPFL. Yeah, and I'm really excited to be a part of this interview series.
Great, and thank you so much for giving your time here for this brief conversation that we're going to have. And I'd really like to kind of kick things off with, your early years. You have an interesting background, so I hope you're willing to share a little bit about that and kind of, how did you get into thinking about being a scientist? So,
yeah, I think growing up where I grew up in Burma, with really limited resources, really I was not at all exposed to any kind of research. So I didn't really even know what a scientist actually was. I mean, kind of a, I grew up in that kind of a setting and lacking even basics such as science kits, as I grew up. And but when I got an opportunity to go to attend high school, also called sixth form, sort of studies, that's the high school equivalent in the US, and that really changed everything for me. And that opportunity to go abroad, leave home for the first time from Burma, really came as a huge miracle. I managed to win a full scholarship to study there, for my high school period in the UK, and I was very fortunate that the teachers in the school were excellent, in my science classes, and especially my chemistry teacher there really went above and beyond, to impart her deep knowledge and really inspired me and instill in me the love for the subject. And that was also the very first time I even encountered, basic equipment like a test tube for the first time in practical world, in real, it's kind of a setting. And so there was, growing up, there was this deep-seated hunger, if you like, for learning inside me, and that my opportunity to study abroad and really see the high quality education and training really changed my world and what I, wanted to be in the future. So my chemistry teacher there herself was a graduate of Oxford University. So, I was just so eager to be like her. I would like to be, become a sort of a teacher, educator, follow the subject that I really came to love a lot and would like to learn a lot. So I followed what she did and I managed to, get the position to study in Oxford, again, luckily with scholarship support.
That's great. And so chemistry the whole way, were there other sciences that intrigued you too, or?
Yeah, so I like all kind of practical science, but I would say many times the right teacher, the right moment really makes a huge difference as well. So I was quite into a quantitative science in terms of, science in general. So I actually did not take biology at all at high school choices. So yes, exactly. And that was also a big switch later on when I, after I finished my PhD, I changed biology. I think that, if I look back, that probably was because, in the early days, biology, such as high school level, a lot of the things are rote memorization. I was more into problem solving, and I think kind of a physics or chemistry really deliver that kind of challenge and being able to have problems, question that you really solve or practically or through thinking. And perhaps that's really why I got drawn into chemistry over other science subject, especially biology. But now I'm doing quite a lot of biological research.
Yeah. So you followed your footsteps of your first mentor and got into Oxford. What brought you to the US? How did you sort of think about that transition?
Yes, a very good question. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I moved around quite a bit in my life already. So what happened was, I luckily got into Oxford, and there I was given the opportunity to learn deeply in chemistry, as a subject, and my tutors there really, give me opportunity to learn beyond the curriculum, giving me, additional kind of resources to read up in my own time. And I was really sort of inspired to become an academic at that point, going through, 4 years is a bachelor master's combined degree at Oxford. But I would say that the point that really, turned on my interest into real world research as an academic is the event that really allowed me to do my summer internship in MIT. With Professor Steve Buckwell there. He's a really, one of the sort of a leading sort of a chemist, organic chemist. And because, of his sort of my experience in his lab, I really, and really seeing him and seeing his lab, the way that they do science there, I realized that as an academic chemist, not just being able to educate, students and future generations, but you really can make a major impact through your own independent, research innovations. Steve has shown that through his, own research inventions and so on and so forth. So that really opened my eyes to really have both education and research and to be an independent investigator. And Steve's always been very kind to me. He said that, if you really wanted to pursue kind of an independent position as an investigator, staying in the US is the best, because, I really wanted to go back to the UK because I have a lot of tutors, mentors there, friends and etc. But Steve was very straightforward. He said that, if you want to become an early independent investigator, US is the most direct way to get there. If you're committed and, really, if you have this entrepreneurial spirit, you could do that the best way. So I, of course, trusted him.
I agree with him. Now that you've gotten a little bit further, I just want to kind of pause there.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I would say, I think that, both sides have great benefits in different unique ways. But I would say that to become quite rapidly as a very successful independent investigator when you're still young, I would still say that US is the country where, there's very clear pathway to achieve that level at an early investigator. You can be, successful and independent. In Europe, there are institutions nowadays, that could get there, in a very streamlined path, but not all a universal kind of, kind of a global approach in this part of the world.
Okay.
Yeah. So Steve, I would say that because of him, and also, I got into Harvard, which is really a good, really very good training. So there, my, PhD advisor, now the late Professor David Evans, sadly he passed away recently. And with him, I learned organic chemistry research, and I learned to be also a good, a teacher, because they really cares about, making sure that you are not just good in being trained for research, but really being trained for high quality educator. And that always, is in Dave's kind of a, philosophy of teaching and training graduate students. So I was very fortunate there. And then, at the end of my PhD, I switched to kind of a very different field. The very first time I learned to do biology. And I think I can hark back to what I mentioned to you earlier on. I didn't even take high school biology subject. So, and back home, of course, everything was taught in a different language, and, it's kind of different. So, yeah, but what made me decide to switch, because I felt that, as a chemist, after learning chemistry very deeply over, almost one full decade, 4 years undergraduate and then 5 years of PhD, I felt that my learning curve was kind of flat, and I really wanted to really kind of, get up and learn something. I need, some kind of a, something pushing me to learn something new and challenge myself. And that really sort of, took me to a different direction. Indeed, I would say a lot of my peers, and kind of, were a little bit against it, because I'm going out of my, comfort zone and leaving behind my networks, which is quite important. But, to me, perhaps I've already gone through quite a lot of personal challenges in life. I kind of typically am not so afraid of, the unknowns and, challenges. So in my mind, I thought that I'll give it a try and try it out for 6 months. And if I don't like it, or if I don't really succeed, I can always come back and do another postdoc in my own, the field that I'm comfortable with, i.e. chemistry or organic chemistry. So it was more like a testing trial period.
So for those who are maybe watching this, who maybe feel like they don't have the training, people are always like, oh, did you go to this particular lab? Have you followed this particular path? You've always jumped right in. How, you talk a little bit about always wanting the challenge. How do you get the confidence to do that? And what resources do you personally kind of seek out? And how do you get up to speed? I mean, get up to speed starting a new field as a postdoc.
Yeah, exactly. I think before I go there, perhaps I should, briefly mention that my mentors, the mentors that I have met, they've always challenged me intellectually, academically, and pushed me to reach my highest potential. And back in those days, not always I appreciated as a young student, but looking back, had I not met with, those kind of professors and mentors who really, while they nurture me, they actually, tested me, or whatever you would like to say, as a challenge me at the greatest level. And again, as I said, at the time, I thought, oh, yeah, I'm stressed and whatever, right? But looking back, I think those challenges really allowed me to, want to always test how much I could go, how much I could go and learn, and just try to, take a risk. And I know that, you're still young, you can always come back, I don't really care about, if I fail, how would other people think about it? I think it's better, at least in my opinion, to just stay focused on what you personally want and personally get excited about. Many people actually told me not to leave your comfort zone, because it's your network you already created, back in the UK with chemists, as well as then in the US for 5 years with a lot of, chemistry and chemicals, chemistry scientists that you already know as a student in the Evans lab. So I left behind all of this to really start brand new, learning experience. But that took, I would say, a lot of passion as well as hard work. So probably not for, everyone, because you got to be prepared to learn from the ground up. And I remember learning how to pipette, from a high school summer student in Professor Joanne's study lab when I first arrived, because I've never even picked up a pipette, which is very common in biological science. But as a chemist, we did not use them. So things like that, you got to be prepared to, really be very open, learn from everyone, every place, everywhere. I would say that, Joanne herself came as a physical organic chemist in her own training, and now, she's really a leading enzymologist over many years, teaching herself, learning to do complex things. And, that really is also an inspiration to me. That's probably one of the key factors why I pursued to join her laboratory against many others in the field.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you have left those networks behind, or have you joined?
Yes, I think I perhaps, when I started my own lab, perhaps in the early days, perhaps I had many times, but perhaps even up to present day, every now and then I wish, it would have been easier. I would have, have these networks, where the lab papers will be reviewed by, people in their own, because it's always the case, right? But no, I had to go through quite a lot of challenges, entering the field of chemical biology in the beginning, because I wasn't, trained through that program, because I work for organic chemists on one hand for PhD, and an enzymologist, biochemist on the other. But then when my lab started, really we came to be in the unique, field of chemical biology. But really, people know in the field that I did not, sort of transcend from classical chemical biology laboratories.
Mm-hmm. So it's a new faculty now. If we can kind of walk forward a little bit in your career, was it everything you hoped for? Starting doing research.
Yes.
How did you balance?
Yeah, I think Starting years are always tough for everyone, and certainly in the US, probably even tougher. I would say the expectations are high, especially in top schools and programs, and of course. Adding one layer above on top is if you try to change a field, or try to do something really brand new idea rather than incremental or extension of or recapitulation of your training projects, what you have done in postdoc or PhD. That really added a new layer of challenges that my lab actually went through. Looking back, of course, there are many days that you struggle, but you got to be thick-skinned. And again, that I would thank my advisors, whom I had been fortunate to work with. They challenged me a lot during the time I was there. They nurtured me and trained me well. So I feel that having a thick skin really helps. And you got not to give up too easily, I think, if you believe in something. And I would say really thanks to the Beckman Foundation, which was really my very first grant that I was able to obtain, who supported these really challenging ideas that many people balked at the point when the lab began. And Beckman support really allowed us to dedicate many years of dedicated funds and of course team members in the early days to establish this new idea in a very concrete way and apply it in many sort of important directions. And looking back, I would say that all the recognition, we have been very fortunate to be awarded for the lab really is because of the unique contribution and bringing in the idea and new technology to the broader field of chemistry, biology, interface.
And now you've moved again, and you're back.
Yes, yeah. Yes, I think in several reasons, I guess, personal reasons for sure, but also I always am someone who would like to do new things, kind of develop new ideas. And oftentimes, once you pass your initial early years, the funding for brand new ideas is even in the US, you would know that for starting faculty, there are much more, I guess, many more opportunities as you grow further. It's always kind of less predictable, I would say. But in Europe, the funding is really kind of a regular, and that because there's always internal support, it makes it less of a worry, I would say, to be able to launch these kind of new ideas, new programs without worrying so much about what the next 4 years funding will be.
Yeah, now you're head of the lab, and
yes, yeah, it's a permanent tenure position, and really it allowed us to pursue some of our new ideas, and we moved now about almost 4 years, 3.5 years now. But with COVID, it took us a while to get back up and running. But actually, my whole team moved with me. That's also, I would say, that the major reason that made the move possible, because it's a big international move. My lab members really, thanks to them, they moved with me to Switzerland, and that really helped the ground running again. Now in a new place, in a new country.
Yeah, and you've taken on another challenge. At least it seems like a challenge in being an associate editor. Just curious if you could touch a little bit on what is that, like what is that role? And
yes, yeah. So I always like to provide service, and not being a service to my direct community, institution, teaching, etc. But really, I think being able to provide service and help through my knowledge and experience is really always a great pleasure. For me, it's one of my best pastimes. So when the opportunity came up to be invited to serve in this role, of course, really, I said yes with a great excitement. And so I started in this role in January under the new editor-in-chief leadership. And of course, there's always a learning experience and, making sure we promote the journal to, get more submissions, more publication, but at the same time, to try to maintain the quality. And it's always a compromise, and we have to strive for a good balance, and of course diversity in submissions, because it's even though it's an ACS, it's as a high-profile international journal, we would like to even expand further to have submissions from all corners of the world. So we're always striving for new directions under the new leadership. And I would perhaps not say as a challenge, but really is something that it takes some time to learn to serve and learn to improve as in this role. But I think that it's been really fun. And I hope to continue in this capacity for the foreseeable future. And of course, you got to read many papers, many more than, as a peer reviewer. So it is quite exciting, but you got to be sure that every week you don't get your jobs piled up, because otherwise it will be, there will be too many delays. So even if you may be really busy, have a lot of deadlines, you still have to, commit weekly hours to make sure that, your jobs don't pile up. Because it is important for the
very good time management skills.
Yes, absolutely. So I think, additional kind of a continuing role that you got to be sure you don't slack off. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for kind of walking us through your career and your progression. And I just would like to add, is there anything else that you would like to speak about? And, it sounds like you've really lined up excellent mentors, and I don't know if you maybe have a few words of advice on sort of how to find those people and screen them perhaps, or did you go through process kind of really deciding deliberately?
Yes, yeah. I have been fortunate, I would say, starting from my high school chemistry teacher. Of course, you can't pick and choose, right? I mean, that came your way, but as a student, as a mentee, you also, really interact well, especially when you see a professor or a mentor who is really willing to guide you. You, of course, grab the opportunity to, really try to achieve the best potential in the given situation you have, right? I think these days, perhaps there are more and more opportunities for external mentorships, etc., for, younger scientists, more so than during the days of my training. First, I have been fortunate, and second, I feel that, of course, there are many, professors, mentors. Many times, I try to get, several different advisors, but ultimately, it is you who have to make your own decision, right? Because it's your own future, your own life. Just like, how several mentors at the point I was changing field, kind of perhaps, if you like to say it, advise me against it, going to, totally different field. But now looking back, my lab would not have been in this position past 10 years if I had not, really chosen to take up two different fields in very deep training in a challenging kind of a setting. So I think it is important for, young scientists to be afraid of, potential failure, especially what other people may think about me, so think about you, etc. But if you have a gut feeling, a great idea, you really wanted to test out, pursue, and especially first 1 or 2 years when you start your own lab is where you have the startup funding, is the best time with unrestricted grant to actually try to test something out. So the Rex Technologies idea our lab really developed it was initially my own project that was really started by my own hands, while my starting students in my lab were working on the safer projects that are extension of my postdoctoral project research area. So I think it's important to try to go out of comfort zone, learn as much as you can, and do not be fearful of what the failure may take you, right? I think that perhaps resonates with one of the quotes from the Beckman himself, right?
Don't be afraid of making mistakes.
Yes, exactly. Of the failure. It could be the success just waiting around the corner in the next step.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your time. It was great speaking with you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to meet you, and thanks again.